I remember sitting at the kitchen counter when I was 8 years old, my mind buzzing with questions about how computers could think like humans. I'd been reading about artificial intelligence all morning, and I couldn't contain my excitement. Mom, what if we could build machines that could help solve climate change? What if they could discover new medicines while we sleep? The silence that followed felt like a door slamming shut. My mother didn't even look up from her coffee. My stepfather shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The only sound was the humming of the refrigerator. That silence became the background music of my childhood, a constant reminder that my thoughts, my dreams, my very existence seemed to irritate everyone around me. At school, the pattern repeated. When I tried to share an idea about how we could use technology to help disabled students learn better, or when I'd ask why we couldn't program computers to be more creative, my teachers would give me that look. You know the one, the look that says, "There's the strange kid again." Some would politely redirect the conversation. Others would tell me to focus on the assignment, but none of them seemed to understand that I was trying to understand everything all the time. The other kids were even worse. They'd snicker when I'd get excited about programming projects. They'd whisper behind my back when I talk about building robots. I started to realize that being different wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. People don't like what they don't understand, and I was becoming something they definitely didn't understand. I'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering if there was something fundamentally wrong with me. Why couldn't I just be interested in normal things? Why did my brain always want to deconstruct every system and rebuild it better? The questions never stopped, but the answers never came, at least not from anyone around me. That's when I learned my first lesson. The world isn't ready for your ideas just because you're ready to share them, but that doesn't mean you should stop having them. It just means you need to get comfortable with the silence, because it's going to be there for a while. Home was supposed to be my sanctuary. It wasn't. If anything, it was worse than school because at least at school, I could escape after a few hours. At home, I was trapped with him, my stepfather, Frank. People always ask me about my childhood, and I usually try to change the subject, but the truth is, living with Frank was like living with a psychological terrorist. He had this way of making everything about him, even when it had nothing to do with him. If I came home excited about something I'd learned, he'd find a way to tear it down. Not just the idea, he'd tear me down for having it. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he'd say, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you know better than everyone else." The worst part wasn't the yelling, though there was plenty of that. The worst part was the mind games. He'd tell me I was stupid one day, then act like nothing happened the next. He'd make promises he had no intention of keeping, then blame me when I was disappointed. He'd pit me against my siblings, telling each of us different stories about the others. It was like living in a house of mirrors where nothing was real and everything was designed to make you question your own sanity. I remember one night when I was about 10, I'd been working on a small robot, nothing fancy, just a little device I'd built from electronics kits. I was so proud of it. When I showed it to him, he looked at it for about 2 seconds, then swept it into the trash. "Stop wasting your time on this junk," he said. "You'll never amount to anything anyway." Those words hit me like a physical blow, but what came next was worse. He started laughing like my hurt was the funniest thing in the world. "Look at you," he said. "You're going to cry over a pile of garbage. You're pathetic." I didn't cry. Not then. I'd learned early that crying only made things worse. Instead, I went to my room and sat on my bed, staring at the wall. That's when I realized something important. His cruelty wasn't about me. It was about him. He was trying to break me down because something in him was already broken. Understanding that didn't make it hurt less, but it gave me something to hold on to. The psychological abuse wasn't just occasional outbursts. It was systematic. Day after day, he'd chip away at my confidence, my self-worth, my belief in my own perceptions. He'd tell me I was imagining things that weren't there, feeling things that weren't real. He'd rewrite history, making me question my own memories. It was like being slowly erased from the inside out. But here's what he didn't count on. I was stubborn. Stubborn enough to keep believing in myself even when no one else did. Stubborn enough to keep building things even when they got thrown in the trash. Stubborn enough to survive him. If home was a psychological war zone, school was a social minefield. From the moment I walked through those doors, I was marked. Maybe it was because I was different. Maybe it was because I was small for my age. Maybe it was because I didn't know how to pretend to be someone I wasn't. Whatever the reason, I became the target. It started with name-calling, weirdo, freak, robot boy. They'd whisper these things when the teachers weren't looking, then act innocent when I try to report it. The teachers didn't want to deal with it anyway. It was easier to tell me to just ignore them than to actually address the problem. But ignoring them didn't make them stop, it made them escalate. The verbal abuse turned physical, shoved in hallways, books knocked out of my hands, kicked under desks when teachers weren't looking. Each incident was small enough that it seemed petty to complain about, but together they created a constant state of fear and humiliation. I tried to find allies, but there weren't any. The other kids who got picked on were too scared to stand up for anyone else. The popular kids either participated in the bullying or pretended not to see it. The teachers were overwhelmed and underpaid, more focused on getting through their lessons than protecting their students. The worst incident happened when I was about 12. I'd been coding during lunch, my usual escape, when a group of boys surrounded me. They started with the usual taunts, but something felt different that day. There was a violence in their eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Think you're better than us?" one of them said. "Always sitting alone with your computer, acting like you're some kind of genius?" I tried to walk away, but they blocked my path. That's when I made a mistake. I fought back. Not physically, I wasn't strong enough for that, but I used words. I told them exactly what I thought of their small minds and smaller futures. I was angry, and I wanted them to hurt the way they'd been hurting me. That's when they snapped. One of them grabbed me, and before I knew it, I was tumbling down a flight of stairs. My head hit the concrete at the bottom, and everything went dark. I woke up in a hospital bed with a concussion and a face that looked like it had been used as a punching bag. The doctor said I was lucky, a few inches to the left, and I might have broken my neck. My mother was there, crying. Frank was there too, but he wasn't crying. He was angry that I'd caused trouble and embarrassed the family. The school called it an accident. The boys who pushed me said I tripped. Nobody wanted to investigate further. Nobody wanted to rock the boat. I learned another lesson that day. Sometimes the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, just not for people like you. When I went back to school weeks later, nothing had changed. If anything, the bullying got worse. Now I was marked as someone who couldn't protect himself, someone who could be hurt without consequences. The message was clear: you're on your own. The loneliness was the worst part. People think loneliness is just being alone, but it's not. It's being surrounded by people who don't see you, don't understand you, and don't want to try. I was lonely in crowded classrooms, lonely at family dinners, lonely in my own bed at night. I'd watch other kids laughing with their friends, and I'd wonder what that felt like. I'd see fathers teaching their sons how to throw footballs or fix cars, and I'd wonder what it would be like to have someone actually care about your progress. I'd observe normal families having normal conversations, and I'd wonder if I was missing some crucial piece of human software that everyone else seemed to have installed. The isolation wasn't just social, it was intellectual. I'd gotten to the point where I could code faster than most adults, where I could understand complex algorithms that my teachers struggled with. But having knowledge without having anyone to share it with felt like carrying a treasure chest with no key. What good was understanding technology if you were the only one in your universe? I started spending more and more time alone, not by choice, but because it was easier than pretending to fit in. I'd find empty computer labs during lunch and code. I'd explore online forums after school. I'd sit in my room for hours just thinking, building virtual worlds in my head. The quiet became my companion, the only presence that didn't judge me or try to change me. But the quiet also became my enemy. In the silence, the voices in my head got louder. Frank's voice telling me I was worthless. The bullies' voices telling me I was a freak. My own voice starting to agree with them. The loneliness wasn't just external anymore. It was internal. I was becoming lonely inside my own skin. I'd look in the mirror and see someone I didn't recognize. Someone who'd been beaten down so many times that he'd forgotten how to stand up straight. Someone who'd been told he was wrong so many times that he'd started to believe it. The dangerous part about prolonged loneliness is that it starts to feel normal. You stop expecting things to change. You stop hoping for connection. You start to believe that this is just how your life is going to be, a series of days spent watching other people live the life you wish you could have. I'd lie awake at night listening to the sounds of the world outside my window. Cars driving by, people talking, dogs barking, all signs of life happening somewhere else, to someone else. I felt like I was watching the world through glass, close enough to see everything but unable to touch any of it. But even in that darkness, something was growing. A stubborn refusal to accept that this was all there was. A growing certainty that somewhere out there had to be people who thought like I did, who saw the world the way I saw it. I just had to survive long enough to find them. There comes a moment in every person's life when they have to choose who they're going to be. For me, that moment came when I was 14, sitting in my room after another day of hell at school and home. I'd been beaten down so many times that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up. I'd been told I was worthless so many times that I'd started to believe it. I was staring at a book about artificial intelligence, one of my few escapes, when something inside me snapped. Not broke, but snapped into place, like a bone that had been dislocated suddenly popping back into its socket. The pain was still there, but now it had purpose. I realized that everyone who'd been trying to break me down had been wrong about one fundamental thing. They thought my differences were weaknesses. They thought my questions were problems. They thought my refusal to accept that's just how things are was defiance. But they were wrong. These weren't bugs in my system, they were features. The bullies who called me weird didn't understand that weird was just another word for different, and different was just another word for potentially better. Frank, who called me worthless, didn't understand that worth isn't determined by your ability to conform, it's determined by your ability to contribute something new to the world. I started to see the abuse differently, not as something that was happening to me, but as something that was happening around me. The people who hurt me weren't revealing some truth about my inadequacy, they were revealing their own fears, their own limitations, their own inability to understand anything beyond their narrow experience. This shift in perspective changed everything. Instead of asking why me, I started asking what now. Instead of focusing on what I couldn't control, other people's cruelty, I started focusing on what I could control, my response to it. I began to understand that resilience isn't about not getting knocked down. It's about getting back up, learning from what knocked you down, and becoming stronger because of it. Every insult, every beating, every moment of isolation was teaching me something valuable about human nature, about power dynamics, about the way the world really works. The loneliness that had felt like a prison started to feel like a workshop. Without the distractions of social acceptance, without the pressure to conform, I could focus entirely on understanding how things worked and how they could work better. I could ask the questions that other people were too afraid to ask. I could think thoughts that other people were too conventional to think. I started to see my childhood not as a tragedy, but as a training program, a brutal, unfair, unnecessarily harsh training program, but a training program nonetheless. Every challenge was making me stronger, more independent, more willing to stand alone when everyone else was sitting down. The abuse didn't stop. If anything, it got worse as I started to show less fear, less willingness to be broken, but my relationship with it changed. Instead of being a victim of it, I became a student of it. I learned how bullies think, how they operate, how they choose their targets. I learned how to avoid some conflicts and how to survive the ones I couldn't avoid. More importantly, I learned that survival wasn't enough. I didn't want to just endure this life. I wanted to build a better one, not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever felt like an outsider. Everyone who'd ever been told they were too different, too weird, too much. The turning point came when I realized that my pain had a purpose, not because someone intended it to, but because I chose to give it one. All those hours spent alone, all those moments of feeling misunderstood, all those times when I thought I was crazy for seeing the world differently, they were preparing me for something bigger. I started to understand that the world I carried inside my head, the one that seemed so foreign to everyone around me, wasn't a delusion. It was a preview, a glimpse of what was possible if someone was willing to ignore the voices saying it can't be done and focus on the questions saying what if it could? The abuse had taught me something valuable. I didn't need other people's approval to know that my ideas were worth pursuing. I didn't need their understanding to know that my vision was valid. I didn't need their support to know that I could build something better than what currently existed. Every time someone had told me I was thinking too big, dreaming too large, reaching too far, they were actually pointing me toward exactly what I needed to be doing. The things that seemed impossible to them seemed inevitable to me. The problems that seemed unsolvable to them seemed like puzzles waiting for the right approach. I began to see that my childhood had been a gift wrapped in the ugliest paper imaginable. The isolation had forced me to develop independent thinking. The abuse had taught me to question authority. The loneliness had given me the space to imagine worlds that didn't exist yet, but could. While other kids were learning to fit in, I was learning to stand out. While they were learning to accept limitations, I was learning to ignore them. While they were learning to be realistic, I was learning to be visionary. The very things that made me a target as a child were the things that would make me unstoppable as an adult. I started to understand that the reason nobody understood me wasn't because I was wrong, it was because I was early. I was seeing possibilities that wouldn't become obvious to others for years or decades. I was asking questions that humanity wasn't ready to answer yet, but would desperately need to answer someday. The loneliness that had felt like punishment started to feel like preparation. How could I build things for a future that nobody else could see if I hadn't learned to be comfortable being the only one who could see it? How could I persist through inevitable failures and criticism if I hadn't already learned to persist through much worse? I realized that every person who'd ever done something truly significant had probably felt like an outsider at some point. They'd probably been misunderstood, criticized, maybe even abused. The difference between the ones who changed the world and the ones who didn't wasn't talent or intelligence. It was the willingness to keep going when everyone else said stop. My vision started to crystallize, not just what I wanted to build, but why I wanted to build it. Every algorithm that could make decisions more fair, every system that could work more efficiently, every solution to problems that people didn't even know they had yet. These weren't just interesting ideas to me, they were obligations, responsibilities to the kid I'd been, to the outsiders who were still being told they were too weird, too different, too much. The abuse had tried to teach me that I was small, insignificant, powerless, but it had accidentally taught me the opposite. It had shown me that even the smallest person could be threatening enough to powerful people that they felt the need to crush them. If I was worth crushing, maybe I was worth building up too. Looking back now, I can see that everything I went through, the abuse, the bullying, the isolation, the constant feeling of being misunderstood, was preparing me for something I couldn't have imagined at the time. It was teaching me lessons that no school could teach, building muscles that no gym could build, developing skills that no textbook could provide. The first lesson was resilience, not the kind of resilience that just endures pain, but the kind that transforms it into fuel. Every time someone tried to break me down, they were actually building me up. Every time someone told me I couldn't do something, they were showing me exactly what I needed to do. Every time someone tried to make me smaller, they were accidentally making me more determined to become larger. The second lesson was independent thinking. When you can't rely on others to understand your ideas, you learn to trust your own judgment. When you can't depend on external validation, you develop internal conviction. When you can't follow the crowd because the crowd won't accept you, you learn to find your own path. The third lesson was the power of vision. When reality is painful, you either break or you build something better. The abuse taught me to see beyond what was to what could be. The loneliness taught me to imagine connections that didn't exist yet. The misunderstanding taught me to envision a world where different kinds of minds were valued, not vilified. The fourth lesson was empathy, not the soft kind that just feels sorry for people, but the strong kind that actually wants to solve their problems. Every moment of pain I experienced made me more determined to prevent others from experiencing the same thing. Every system that failed me made me more committed to building better systems. The fifth lesson was persistence. When you've already survived the worst things that people can do to you, everything else becomes manageable. When you've already been broken and rebuilt yourself, you develop confidence that you can handle whatever comes next. When you've already been told you're impossible, you stop worrying about what's supposedly possible. The most important lesson was this: the world needs people who think differently, see differently, dream differently. The abuse I suffered was terrible, but it was also proof of something important. I was different enough to be threatening to people who needed everyone to be the same. That difference wasn't a bug to be fixed, it was a feature to be developed. Every kid who feels like an outsider, every person who's been told they're too weird, too different, too much, you're not broken, you're not wrong, you're not alone, you're just early. You're seeing something that others can't see yet, feeling something that others can't feel yet, understanding something that others can't understand yet. The pain you're going through isn't permanent, but the strength you're building from it is. The loneliness you're feeling isn't a life sentence, but the independence you're developing from it is. The misunderstanding you're experiencing isn't a verdict on your worth, but the vision you're developing because of it is. Don't let them break you. Don't let them convince you that you're the problem. Don't let them make you smaller to fit into their small world. Instead, build a bigger world. Build a world where different kinds of minds are celebrated, where different kinds of questions are welcomed, where different kinds of dreams are supported. The abuse tried to teach me that I was nothing. Instead, it taught me that I could be everything. It tried to teach me that I was powerless. Instead, it taught me how to build power. It tried to teach me that I was alone. Instead, It taught me how to find and create the connections that mattered. If this story reminds you of your own childhood, you're not alone. We're out here, we survivors, we builders, we dreamers who were told we were too much but refused to become less. We're the proof that pain can be transformed into purpose, that isolation can become independence, that being different can become being revolutionary. The world needs what you have to offer. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.